She smiled at me like she'd already won. That's the first thing I noticed when she walked into my courtroom. Not nervousness, not respect. A smile. Confident, calculated, like she'd done this before. And maybe she had. I've seen thousands of people stand where she was standing. Some scared, some apologetic, some defiant. But this woman, she was different. She knew something I didn't know yet. The citation was simple. Parking violation, $45, nothing dramatic, nothing worth remembering. But the moment she opened her mouth, I knew this wasn't going to be simple at all. Your Honor, I can explain everything. That phrase, I've heard it 10,000 times, but the way she said it, smooth, rehearsed, with just the right amount of vulnerability in her voice, it set off something in my gut. I paused. Go ahead, I said. She took a breath. A theatrical one. The kind actors use before a big monologue. And then she started talking. Her story was perfect. Too perfect. She told me about her sick mother, the hospital visits, the parking meter that wouldn't take her card, the panic, the tears. Every detail painted a picture of a woman crushed by circumstance, doing her best, just trying to survive. And I listened. I always listen. But while she spoke, I watched. Her hands, her eyes, the micro expressions that people don't even know they're making. And something wasn't adding up. She never blinked when she mentioned her mother. Her fingers stayed completely still. No trembling, no fidgeting, no signs of actual distress. This woman wasn't telling me a story. She was performing one. I let her finish. The courtroom was quiet. Everyone was waiting for my response, waiting to see if Judge Caprio would do what he always does, show mercy, forgive the fine, send her home with a warm smile. But I didn't say anything yet. I just looked at her. 5 seconds passed, then 10. The silence stretched. It filled the room like smoke, heavy, uncomfortable, and I could see it starting to affect her. That smile from earlier, it flickered, just for a moment. Ma'am, I said slowly, what's your mother's name? She blinked. Excuse me? Your mother. You mentioned her. What's her name? Oh, Margaret. I nodded. Margaret. And which hospital is she at? Another pause. Smaller this time, but I caught it. St. Michael's. St. Michael's, I repeated. How long has she been there? Now her fingers moved, just slightly. A tiny scratch at her wrist. A tell. About 3 weeks now. I leaned back in my chair. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear someone shift in their seat 2 rows back. 3 weeks, I said. That must be very hard for you. It is, Your Honor. Very hard. I nodded again. Slow, deliberate. And then I picked up the paper in front of me. The citation, the date, the time, the location. This ticket, I said, was issued at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday at a meter on Broadway Street. Yes, Your Honor. Broadway Street is 6 blocks from St. Michael's Hospital. She didn't respond. And the meter you were parked at? It takes coins, cards, and phone payments. 3 different options. Her jaw tightened. Just a fraction. Now, I continued, I'm looking at this citation, and it says you were parked there for 3 hours. 3 hours. Not 15 minutes while you ran inside to see your mother. 3 hours. The room shifted. I felt it. The energy changed. People were leaning forward now. And here's what's interesting, I said. St. Michael's Hospital has a parking garage, free for the first 4 hours if you're visiting a patient. Did you know that? Silence. Ma'am, did you know that? I wasn't aware. You weren't aware. I let those words hang there. You've been visiting your mother for 3 weeks, and you didn't know the hospital has free parking. Her face was losing color now. The confidence was draining, like water from a cracked glass. But I wasn't done. I'm also noticing, I said, that this isn't your first parking ticket. According to our records, you've been in this courtroom 4 times in the last year, 4 different parking violations, and each time, I flipped through the papers, each time you had a different story, a sick relative, a broken meter, an emergency, a family crisis. The courtroom was electric now. You could feel it, the tension, the realization spreading through the room like wildfire. She tried to speak. "Your Honor, Let me ask you something," I interrupted. My voice was calm, steady, but there was steel underneath it. "Do you think I'm stupid?" She froze. "Do you think I sit here, day after day, year after year, and I don't notice patterns, that I don't see when someone is manipulating this courtroom, manipulating me?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "Because that's what you're doing," I said. "You walked in here with a rehearsed story, a fake emergency, manufactured tears. You thought you could play on my compassion. You thought you could weaponize my kindness." I leaned forward. "You thought you could manipulate the system." The snap had happened. I could see it in her eyes. The mask was gone. The performance was over. What was left was just a woman who'd been caught, exposed, stripped of her script, and now the courtroom was waiting for me to deliver judgment, waiting for me to be harsh, angry, punitive. But that's not who I am. I took a breath. "Ma'am," I said, softer now. "Why?" She looked up at me, confused. "Why do you do this? Why the lies? Why the manipulation?" For the first time she looked real, vulnerable. The armor was gone. "I don't know," she whispered. "You don't know. I thought... You thought you could get away with it." She nodded, barely. I sat back in my chair. The anger was gone now. What I felt instead was something different, something sadder. "You know what the worst part is?" I said. "If you had just told me the truth, if you had walked in here and said, 'Judge, I made a mistake. I parked illegally. I can't afford the fine right now,' I would have helped you. I would have worked with you, set up a payment plan, reduced the fine, something." Her eyes were wet now. "But instead you lied. You manipulated. You disrespected this courtroom and everyone in it. And you know what that does? It makes it harder for people who really do have emergencies, people who really are struggling, people who deserve compassion. Because now I have to wonder, is this person telling the truth, or are they like you?" The room was silent, completely silent. "You took something sacred," I said, "and you tried to exploit it. Compassion isn't a weakness. It's not a loophole. It's not something you manipulate for a $45 parking ticket." I could see her shoulders shaking now. She was crying, real tears this time. And here's the thing about moments like these. This is where the real work happens. Not in the anger, not in the punishment, but in what comes next. Because I could throw the book at her. I could maximize the fine, add court fees, make an example out of her, and maybe some judges would. Maybe she deserved it, but that's not justice. That's revenge. Justice is something else. "I'm going to tell you what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to pay this fine, all of it. No reduction, no payment plan, because you need to understand that actions have consequences, real consequences." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "But," I continued, "I'm also going to give you something, a chance, because despite everything you've done, despite the lies and the manipulation, I still believe people can change. I still believe there's something better in you than what you showed me today." I picked up my pen. "So here's my condition. You pay the fine, and you don't come back to this courtroom with another story, another excuse, another manipulation. You be honest, with yourself, with others, with the world. Because the moment you start being honest, you'll realize you don't need these games anymore." She was fully crying now, not theatrical tears, real ones. "Can you do that?" I asked. "Yes," she whispered. "Can you be honest?" "Yes, Your Honor." I stamped the paper. "Then we're done here." She stood there for a moment, frozen, like she couldn't believe it was over, like she expected something more, something worse. "You can go," I said gently. She walked out of that courtroom different than when she walked in. I could see it in her posture, the weight she was carrying, the shame, the realization, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something better. The next person came to the stand. Another case, another story. But I was still thinking about her, about that smile she wore when she walked in, about how quickly it disappeared. People think manipulation is power. They think if they can control the narrative, control the emotions in the room, they can control the outcome. But manipulation isn't power. It's fear. It's what you do when you don't trust yourself, when you don't trust the truth. And the truth? The truth is what sets you free. I've been doing this job for decades. I've seen thousands of people try to manipulate this courtroom. Some are better at it than others. Some are more desperate. Some are more calculating. But they all share one thing in common. They all think I won't notice. They think they're the first person to try this. They think they're smarter than the system. They're not. And here's what I've learned. The moment you stop playing games, the moment you stand in front of that bench and you just tell the truth, no embellishments, no excuses, just raw honesty, that's when real change happens. That's when you stop being a defendant and start being a person. That's when I stop being a judge and start being someone who can actually help. Because at the end of the day, this courtroom isn't about parking tickets or fines or citations. It's about people, human beings, trying to navigate a complicated world, making mistakes, falling short, trying to survive. And my job? My job isn't to punish, it's to guide, to teach, to remind people that there's a better way, even when they smile at me like they've already won, especially then. Because that smile, it's just armor, and armor is heavy, and eventually everyone wants to put it down. That woman walked into my courtroom wearing armor. She walked out carrying something much lighter, the truth, and that's worth more than any fine I could ever dismiss.